You know, it's not that people in government, bureaucrats, are necessarily stupid or incompetent, but it's a debatable question. But they don't get the same signals. So the reason why you don't want your government to own anything, if possible, or to only get involved with those things that the private market can't, is that the private market sends a constant barrage of signals. And people have to respond to those every day. It's sort of a cruel world, the economy is. But that's how we get efficiency, and that's how we get cheap prices for people on different products, is because people are forced. They don't do it out of benevolence. They do it out of this fierce competition in the marketplace. Once you involve government in it, you take that away you take those forces away that breed excellence. And so I think it's a big mistake to have government ownership of things. And of course, it's a step towards socialism. What is worrisome is when you see the people supporting the president just sort of saying, oh, no, this is good, and it is good that the government should own. And that really worries me, because I worry that the free market movement, the movement that was a big part of the Republican Party, is being diminished.
I've sat through plenty of political circus acts, but Senator Rand Paul's takedown of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump was on another level. It felt less like a Senate debate and more like an open mic roast gone rogue. Honestly, you had to squint to figure out if this was C-SPAN or the weirdest late-night comedy sketch. And trust me, it wasn't the quiet kind of disagreement. It was the kind where someone flips the Monopoly board, storms out of the room, and then still manages to insult your shoe choice on the way out.
A rare rebuke of the Trump White House from a Republican. It is coming from Senator Rand Paul, who is accusing the White House of immaturity and petty vindictiveness. His words, this after he and his family were disinvited from the annual White House picnic. The White House has not responded to these comments. Perspective now from our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. Manu, what more is Senator Paul saying?
Well, he's very frustrated, John. In fact, this is an event that is a bipartisan one. Democrats and Republicans typically attend this every single year with presidents of both parties. Paul has been to 10 of these, but he thinks he is now the first senator ever to be disinvited from this event. He believes this is what, quote, petty vindictiveness. He says that he has lost a lot of respect from Donald Trump for doing this. And he says that not just him, he's not the only one who's been disinvited. He said also his nearly 6-month-old grandson can't come to this event.
I just find this incredibly petty. I have been an intellectual opponent, a public policy opponent, and he's chosen now to uninvite me from the picnic and to say my grandson can't come to the picnic.
Here's the deal with Rand Paul. He always struck me as the guy who'd sit in the back of the Senate, sipping tea, muttering about the Constitution, the way your grandpa complains about gas prices. But not this time. He came out swinging, grabbed the mic like it was open mic night, and went straight for the jugular.
The Constitution in Article 2 talks about the president can't take emoluments or gifts from foreign leaders. And so there is a provision in the Constitution that says you can't do this. And so the question is, can you do it if it's only for official purposes? If it came to someone in Congress, they can vote and the Ethics Committee can look at it. With his, there will have to be some kind of adjudication. This has never been done, and it's not like a ride on the plane. We're talking about the entire $400 million plane. I think it's not worth the appearance of impropriety. Whether it's improper or not, I don't think it's worth it. The other problem with Qatar is, see, I've spent time trying not to sell weapons to Qatar because they have human rights violations of their people. Many of their people are prevented from participating in the government, and some of the minority religious folks in Qatar are treated poorly. And so I really haven't been a big fan, and I wonder if our ability to judge their human rights record would be clouded by the fact of this large gift.
Without even blinking. And then there was J.D. Vance, looking like that kid in high school who thought the debate team would make him cool, only to realize it just made him an easy target. Rand Paul wasted no time calling him out, painting Vance as nothing more than Trump's mini-me. And let's be real, that's hardly the kind of nickname you brag about.
Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul had some harsh words for Vice President Vance over the administration's military actions against cartel members. The U.S. conducted an airstrike against a suspected drug vessel leaving Venezuela last week. And Vice President Vance said afterwards on social media that killing cartel members is the, quote, best use of our military. Senator Paul responded over the weekend, quote, did he ever read To Kill a Mockingbird? Did he ever wonder what might happen if the accused were immediately executed without trial or representation?
Trump is the kind of guy who walks into a room and makes it about himself. Vance apparently decided the best career move was to become the discount store version of that, and Paul wasn't having it. At one point, Paul straight up called out Vance's flip-flopping on Trump. Watch what I mean. He basically laid it out like, hey, one day Vance is calling Trump a disaster for America. The next day he's hanging out at Mar-a-Lago like a kid who just discovered the cool table in the cafeteria.
I'm kind of with Elon on this, with Elon Musk. He said it's hard to be big and beautiful. When you put a lot of stuff in the bill, it makes it harder and harder for everybody to agree on everything. The tax cuts, I'm for. I voted for them in 2017. I'd like to make the tax cuts permanently. As far as the spending cuts, I think they're kind of wimpy and anemic. I'd like more, but I'd still vote for what we have. The main thing that's giving me heartburn is raising the debt ceiling $5 trillion. When you raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion, it'll be the largest increase in the debt ceiling ever in the history of our country. That gives me heartburn, and I think if Republicans vote to raise the debt ceiling that much, we own it. The debt, we've always blamed the other side. They spend the money, they raise the debt. I'm still one who thinks the debt is hurting our country. $36 trillion in debt, $1 trillion in interest. So that gives me heartburn, and I've told the president I'm a no unless we separate out the debt ceiling. If you take the debt ceiling off the bill, I'm pretty much a yes on most.
And here's the curveball. Paul actually came armed with receipts. Not vague hints or half-baked jabs, but actual quotes, pointed references, the kind of evidence most politicians pray gets lost in the chaos of 5 news cycles. Nope, Paul rolled up with a shovel and started unearthing it all. And then came the Trump angle. Yikes. Most Republican senators would rather wrestle an alligator than take a real swing at Trump.
Dollars are not proportional to educational success. What I want is success. And I've talked a lot about this. I think there are innovations we can do where there's more learning via some of the best teachers and we pay them more. I would like to have an NBA or NFL of teachers, the most extraordinary teachers, teach the entire country.
Who would run that? The education department?
And some of them, no, what you'd find is they'd be selected out, state by state, across the nation. Look, people say, oh, with the Department of Education would have no testing. I was in school before then. We did achievement tests in the 6th grade, the 5th grade, the 8th grade, and we compared ourselves across state lines. There were international testing.
Yeah.
You don't need the Department of Education for any of that. But what I can tell you is the best teacher in the world is not teaching the kids.
Yeah.
What we need to do is have the best teachers and pay them more, but they wouldn't teach 30 kids. They might teach 10 million kids at a time because it would be presented through the internet with local teachers reinforcing the lesson.
But Paul dove right in. But Paul didn't hold back. He laid it out. Trump turned the GOP into more of a fan club than a political party. Instead of hashing out real policy, the whole game became a contest in creative flattery. Is it enough to pledge loyalty, or do you need to up the ante, declare you'd take a bullet for Trump, all while rocking a MAGA hat, balancing tax cuts, and maybe throwing in a standing ovation just to prove your devotion? Now,
big, not so beautiful bill is passed now. One thing that's for certain is that next year the deficit will be bigger than this year. The bill includes over $500 billion in new spending, and at the end, to get the vote of the Alaska senator, billions and billions and billions more were added. At least $50 billion was added for hospital fund in the end. We don't have any of that money. All of it's borrowed. All of that spending will have to be borrowed, and this bill will lead to a much greater deficit over time, and I don't believe it's fiscally responsible.
Did they try and convince you to vote for the bill by trying to do something different with the debt ceiling?
I had told them all along that I would consider voting for it if we separated out the debt ceiling or reduced it. A couple of weeks ago, I offered to extend the debt ceiling for 3 months, which is about $500 billion. I offered that again, and there was a time in which they had to make a decision dealing with me and reducing the debt ceiling or giving pork and subsidies to Alaska. They chose to add more pork and subsidies for Alaska to secure that vote.
You talk to your House colleagues. Do you think there could be some that will vote against this?
I think they're going to look at it and see that it's much less conservative than it started out to be.
Now, I know some people are thinking, wait, Paul is supposed to be the libertarian guy, right? The leave me alone, let me drink raw milk without the FDA senator. And yes, that's him. Which makes it even funnier when he starts roasting Trump, because he's not even doing it from a left-wing perspective. He's basically saying, look, I've had enough of this circus. This isn't conservatism. This is reality TV with campaign finance. And what about the time Rand Paul was disinvited to the White House? That one sting more.
Rare rebuke of the Trump White House from a Republican. It is coming from Senator Rand Paul, who is accusing the White House of immaturity and petty vindictiveness. His words, this after he and his family were disinvited from the annual White House picnic. The White House has not responded to these comments. Perspective now from our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. Manu, what more is Senator Paul saying?
Well, he's very frustrated, John. In fact, this is an event that is a bipartisan one. Democrats and Republicans typically attend this every single year with presidents of both parties. Paul has been to 10 of these, but he thinks he is now the first senator ever to be disinvited from this event. He believes this is what, quote, petty vindictiveness. He says that he has lost a lot of respect from Donald Trump for doing this. And he says that not just him, he's not the only one who's been disinvited. He said also his nearly 6-month-old grandson can't come to the.
At one point, Paul said something that almost made me spit out my coffee. He compared the GOP under Trump to a bad business model. Imagine investing in a company whose only product is Donald Trump speeches. That's literally the whole pitch. And JD Vance? He's like the unpaid intern standing outside waving a flyer, hoping somebody takes it.
I'm of the belief that, like, right now there's a great danger in our country to losing a movement that represents the free market, trade and capitalism and all of those things, because I think we're moving towards a movement that backs a person. And I feel the wrath all the time. I don't back Donald Trump enough, and so I'm to be, I get along with Donald Trump actually on a personal level better than some of his supporters who've gone crazy. And they don't seem to remember I've supported his nominees. I voted against his impeachments. I was one of the loudest voices against them. And yet they can't stand if I oppose him on one thing. That's not good. And also, there is something, trade is not an incidental issue. Trade is sort of a fundamental aspect of capitalism.
Now, let me ask you this. How does someone go from criticizing Trump as a toxic figure to being his loudest cheerleader? I mean, did Trump secretly have a clearance sale on dignity and Vance just couldn't resist? Because the whiplash is insane. And Paul pointed that out with surgical precision.
I just find this incredibly petty. I have been an intellectual opponent, a public policy opponent, and he's chosen now to uninvite me from the picnic and to say my grandson can't come to the picnic. I just the level of immaturity is beyond words. And so they've decided they want to declare war on my family and exclude us from the White House. I just think it really makes me lose a lot of respect I once had for Donald Trump. But petty vindictiveness like this, I don't know, it makes you wonder about the quality of people you're dealing with. And the same people that are directing this campaign are the same people that casually would throw out parts of the Constitution and suspend habeas corpus. So I think what it tells that they don't like hearing me say stuff like that. And so they want to quiet me down. And
I have to give Paul credit here. Normally, politicians try to tiptoe around Trump, like kids sneaking past their dad, napping on the couch after a six-pack. Not Paul. He was stomping around the living room, turning on the lights, blasting the TV, and daring anyone to say something. And this wasn't just about Trump. Paul was also roasting the idea that Vance is somehow the future of the party.
Controversy, which is kind of spicy when you consider the fact that these are two, one is a Republican senator now, one was his Republican colleague, and, they don't usually go at each other in this way.
Absolutely. This term, we've seen barely any Republican senators try to stand up to the Trump administration. So the fact we're seeing Rand Paul, who is such a fiscal hawk, a conservative, someone potentially the Trump administration could try to make an ally out of, they really haven't. And now we're seeing him go after the Trump administration in no uncertain terms. I mean, have you read To Kill a Mockingbird? To JD Vance, who, is a trained lawyer, is pretty aggressive. So it definitely puts a spotlight on Rand Paul as an interesting character in this GOP Senate.
And Tyler, if there is a Republican who is going to go after the Republican administration, it is Rand Paul. He's probably at the top of the list. But it does shine a light on some of the potential pitfalls for the administration as it continues to prosecute this new fight against cartels using the military to make it happen.
Definitely. And in fact, Nancy, the administration said that this is just the start of these attacks.
I was especially floored when Paul hit on the hypocrisy angle. He reminded everyone that Vance used to talk about Trump like he was a walking disaster, a national embarrassment. And now, he's basically Trump's hype man. carrying the water like it's a full-time job. I sat there thinking, wow, even Paul, who usually saves his outrage for things like foreign aid bills, decided this was too much to ignore. And it's not like Trump escaped unscathed either.
I went on to ask whether that's Stephen Miller, who's of course a very powerful White House aide, whether or not Rand Paul thinks he should continue to work at the White House. And John, he said, quote, "I'm just going to leave it at that." But this is why this is significant too, John. Rand Paul has a vote, and there's a narrow Republican Senate majority. In fact, just 3 Republican senators. That's all that Donald Trump can afford to lose on a party line vote, particularly one to move across his massive bill to implement his domestic agenda. That bill is one that Paul himself has been sharply critical of because of his concerns of the deficit, concerns that it would raise the national debt limit. He does not want that to be part of this bill. And of course, that is what has caused Donald Trump and his aides like Stephen Miller to criticize Paul so sharply over the last several days and weeks. But he is indicating, John, that despite this move, which he calls vindictive and petty, he said he's not changing his position. He does not believe this pressure campaign ultimately will work.
He basically said, look, this isn't conservatism anymore, it's Trumpism. And Trumpism isn't about principles, it's about ego. And he's right. Trump doesn't want a party, he wants a fan club. And JD Vance signed up to be president of that fan club. Here's the kicker, though. Paul, of all people, saying this out loud. That's what shook me. This is the guy who usually hides behind procedural votes and libertarian one-liners. But no, he got up and said, enough is enough. This party can't keep orbiting around one guy's personality. It's not sustainable. And honestly, he's not wrong.
Political view of how I think most Americans are going to view it, most Republicans certainly, and that is that societal decline is a choice. And when you let people come into the country by the millions, when you let drugs flow over the border and you just say, well, let's just get them here and then see how the bureaucracy sorts it out, most people want a more aggressive response. Societal decline is a choice, and they see this illegal immigration problem and this drug flow problem as part of overall societal decline, and they are hoping and looking for and happy with Trump and Vance taking a muscular response to this.
Well, so wait, I want to read something that Senator Rand Paul said and come right to you because you used to work at the Justice Department under Biden. Senator Rand Paul, a Republican from Kentucky, said, JD, I don't give a shit, Vance, that's his words, not mine. It says, killing people he accuses of a crime is the highest and best use of the military. Did he ever read To Kill a Mockingbird? Did he ever wonder what might happen if the accused were immediately executed without trial or representation? What a despicable and thoughtless sentiment it is to glorify killing someone without a trial.
Well, I'll say he has a lot of fair points there. I think there are things that the administration could be doing that are unlawful, and there are legal questions around it. But what I'll also say is that no administration, Republican or Democrat.
Think about it. How long can a major political party survive when the only thing uniting it is loyalty to one man? That's not a platform, that's a subscription service. And sooner or later, people cancel. And yet, here's JD Vance, banking his whole career on being the most loyal subscriber. It's almost sad, really. He could have tried to carve out his own identity, but instead he went all in on being Trump's echo, and Paul basically called him out as a fraud for it.
You get intelligence from a country like Venezuela.
Yes.
I mean, how? You have to stop their operational capabilities, number one. Number two, I would think about the 80s and the 90s and how drugs impacted the black community. Think about how drugs impacted poor white communities coming from south of the border. And so if you were to ask many of those family members who saw their children die or children get strung out on drugs, many children, the children of those people have parents that were in prison as a result of that drug addiction. So to me, you got to do everything you possibly can to destroy these guys, and arresting the cartel leaders, that's not enough because you arrest one, then someone else rises to the top.
What do you think about this, Drake?
Well, I mean, I think we all want drugs kept out of our country, and we should be firm on that. I also believe that in America, you get due process, and just being accused, I haven't seen any solid evidence, and I look forward to having a full confidential briefing in Congress.
I'll tell you what, I didn't expect to be this entertained by Rand Paul, but watching him roast Trump and Vance in one go, that was a plot twist. It was like finding out your quiet neighbor actually fronts a heavy metal band on weekends. You just sit there going, wait, did that really happen? So here's where I leave it. Paul may not be everyone's favorite senator, but the man knows how to drop a grenade when he feels like it. And JD Vance better hope he's got more to offer than being Trump's shadow. Because if not, Paul just ripped the curtain down on the whole act. And if Trump's listening, I'm sure he'll shrug it off the way he does everything. Loudly, dramatically, and with a new round of fundraising emails. But deep down, you know it stings. Because when even Rand Paul is calling out your circus, maybe the show really is getting old. If you enjoyed leaving a like and subscribing, more videos are on the screen now.